Jason sighed heavily as he entered the small, cramped apartment he shared with his mother Linda. The air inside was stuffy and smelled faintly of medication. He set down his grocery bags on the worn kitchen counter, careful not to make too much noise. "Mom, I'm home," he called out softly. A weak voice responded from the bedroom. "In here, sweetie." Jason's heart clenched as he walked into the dimly lit room. Linda lay in bed, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn. She managed a small smile as he approached. "How are you feeling today?" Jason asked gently, taking her hand. "Oh, same old," Linda replied, trying to sound cheerful. Jason nodded, forcing a smile. He couldn't bear to tell her about the stack of unpaid bills waiting on the kitchen table. The weight of their mounting debt pressed down on him like a physical force. Later that evening, after making sure his mother was comfortable, Jason sat at the kitchen table surrounded by overdue notices and medical bills. His eyes stung with unshed tears as he tried to make sense of their financial situation. "There has to be a way," he muttered, running his hands through his hair in frustration. As if answering his plea, a flyer slipped out from between the bills. Jason picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the glossy text. It advertised a charity gala happening that weekend, promising an evening of elegance and generosity with wealthy individuals. "Maybe," Jason whispered, an idea forming in his mind. "Maybe this could be my chance to find a way out of our dire situation." With trembling hands, he reached for his laptop and began researching the event. The gala was open to the public, but tickets were expensive. Jason bit his lip, considering his options. He knew it was a long shot, but he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. "I have to try," he said softly, glancing towards his mother's room. "For Mom." As he continued to plan, Jason felt a mix of excitement and guilt. He knew attending the gala might be a desperate move, but he was willing to do anything to help his mother and escape the crushing weight of their circumstances. Little did Jason know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would challenge his integrity, test his heart, and ultimately change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Jason tugged nervously at his rented tuxedo as he stepped into the grand hall. The crystal chandeliers above sparkled brilliantly, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed crowd. He felt like an outsider, surrounded by people who exuded wealth and confidence. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the sophisticated decorations and the soft music playing in the background. The scent of expensive perfumes and gourmet hors d'oeuvres filled the air, making his stomach rumble, a stark reminder that he hadn't eaten since breakfast, saving every penny to attend this event. As he navigated through the crowd, snippets of conversation floated past him. Mentions of Stockport portfolios and vacation homes, topics that seemed worlds away from his own reality of unpaid bills and his mother's illness. Suddenly, his gaze landed on a striking figure across the room. An elegant black woman stood alone near a large floral arrangement, her silver hair styled into a sophisticated bun. She wore a deep purple gown that shimmered as she moved, and her eyes, though graceful, held a touch of sadness. Intrigued, Jason moved closer to a nearby group, straining to overhear their conversation. "That's Elizabeth Thornton," whispered a woman in a red dress to her companion. "Poor dear, she's been so lonely since losing her husband and son. I've heard she's worth millions now. She inherited her late husband's business, empire, but she rarely shows up at these events," the man responded. Jason's heart raced. Could this be the opportunity he'd been waiting for? He watched as Elizabeth made her way toward the refreshment table, her movements graceful yet somehow hesitant. As she reached for a glass of champagne, her small beaded purse slipped from her hands, falling softly to the polished floor. Without hesitation, Jason stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, bending down to retrieve the purse. "I believe you dropped this." Elizabeth turned, her dark eyes meeting Jason's. For a moment he was struck by the depth of emotion he saw there, a mix of surprise, gratitude, and something that looked like hope. "Oh, thank you, young man," Elizabeth said, her voice warm and rich. "How kind of you to notice." Jason smiled as he handed her the purse. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Thornton. I'm Jason, by the way." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with surprise and warmth as Jason introduced himself. She smiled, grateful for his kindness. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Jason," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "Are you enjoying the gala?" Jason nodded, his nerves melting away as he gazed into Elizabeth's kind eyes. "I am, Mrs. Thornton, though I must admit, I feel a bit out of place amidst all this grandeur." Elizabeth laughed, a sound that reminded Jason of wind chimes. "Please call me Elizabeth. And don't worry, I often feel the same way at these events." As they talked, Jason found himself genuinely drawn to Elizabeth's stories. She spoke of her late husband with such love and admiration that Jason couldn't help but be moved. Thomas always believed in giving back, Elizabeth said, her eyes glistening with tears. Our foundation was his dream, helping children from disadvantaged backgrounds receive a good education. Jason listened intently, nodding at the right moments. That's incredible, Elizabeth. Your husband sounds like an extraordinary man. He truly was, Elizabeth agreed, dabbing her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. And you, Jason, what brings you to this gala? Jason hesitated for a moment, then decided to be as honest as he could. I've always been passionate about helping others. When I heard about this event, I knew I had to come, even if it meant renting this tuxedo, he added with a self-deprecating laugh. Elizabeth's face softened with understanding. That's very admirable, Jason. It's not often that I meet someone so young with such a generous heart. As their conversation continued, Jason found himself opening up about his experiences as a volunteer at local shelters. Though he embellished some details, the heart of his stories came from a place of truth, his genuine desire to help his mother. Elizabeth listened intently, clearly moved by Jason's apparent passion for philanthropy. You know, Jason, she said, placing a hand on his arm, we could use more young people like you at our foundation. Would you be interested in learning more about our work? Jason's heart raced with excitement, mixed with a pang of guilt. I would be honored, Elizabeth. Your work sounds truly inspiring. The following day, Elizabeth and Jason met at a quaint little cafe nestled in the heart of the city. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow over their table. Elizabeth had arrived first, her elegant posture and gentle smile drawing admiring glances from other patrons. When Jason walked in, his eyes immediately found Elizabeth's. He felt a flutter in his chest, a mix of nerves and excitement, as he approached the table. Elizabeth stood to greet him with a warm hug. I'm so glad you could make it, Jason, she said, her voice warm and sincere. Jason smiled, feeling both guilty and touched by her genuine welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Elizabeth. It means a lot. They settled into their seats and the conversation flowed easily between them. Elizabeth shared stories of her late husband and son, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and sorrow as she recounted happy memories. They were my whole world, she confided, her voice soft. Losing them left such a huge void in my life. Jason reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you. You're incredibly strong, Elizabeth. As they talked, Jason found himself opening up about his own life. He spoke about his mother's illness and their growing financial struggles. Though he had initially planned to fabricate a story, the truth spilled out before he could stop it. My mom is all I have, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I'd do anything to make sure she gets the care she needs. Elizabeth listened with a heavy heart, seeing in Jason a kindred spirit, someone who understood the importance of family and the weight of responsibility. Jason, she said softly, squeezing his hand, your devotion to your mother is truly admirable. It reminds me so much of how my Thomas cared for his parents. As the afternoon wore on, Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to Jason's warmth and apparent compassion. She saw in him a potential companion, someone who could understand her values and perhaps even help fill the void in her life. As the days passed, Jason found himself spending more and more time with Elizabeth. They shared meals, attended charity events, and took long walks in the park. With each meeting, Elizabeth's affection for Jason grew, and he could see it in her eyes, in the way she smiled at him. But beneath Jason's charming exterior, an inner battle raged. Every time Elizabeth's face lit up at his arrival, every time she took his hand, he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He tried to push it away, reminding himself of his mother's mounting medical bills and their dire financial situation. Late at night, after bidding Elizabeth farewell following a dinner, Jason sat at his small desk in his cramped apartment. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his worried face as he began researching Elizabeth's financial assets. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he forced himself to continue. As he delved deeper into Elizabeth's wealth, his eyes widened. The extent of her fortune was even greater than he had imagined. With this knowledge, Jason began to formulate a plan. He would continue building Elizabeth's trust, showering her with attention and affection, and eventually propose marriage. Jason's mind raced with the possibilities. With access to Elizabeth's wealth, he could pay off all his debts, provide the best care for his mother, and finally escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped him for so long. But as he closed his laptop and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Jason couldn't shake the image of Elizabeth's gentle and trusting face from his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to convince himself that this was the only way, that he had no other choice. As the weeks passed, Jason and Elizabeth's relationship blossomed. They spent more and more time together, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. Elizabeth felt a renewed sense of purpose and eagerly introduced Jason to her various philanthropic projects. One sunny afternoon, they visited a local community center that Elizabeth had helped fund. As they walked through the bustling hallways, Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with pride. "This place means so much to me," she said, squeezing Jason's hand. "It's wonderful to see how it's changing lives." Jason nodded and smiled, feigning interest. "It really is amazing, Elizabeth," he replied, all the while secretly calculating the potential financial benefits of her generosity. He watched as she greeted the staff and chatted with the center's clients, all the while thinking of how he could use her wealth to solve his own problems. Later that evening, they sat together on Elizabeth's plush sofa, sipping tea. Elizabeth's face grew somber as she turned to Jason. "You know, before I met you, I was so lonely," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "After losing my husband and son, I thought I would never find someone to share my life with again." Jason felt a pang of guilt as he saw the vulnerability in Elizabeth's eyes. He reached out and took her hand, pushing aside his conflicting emotions. "I'm here now," he said softly, trying to sound sincere. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've brought so much joy back into my life, Jason," she said. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. I was so afraid to open my heart, but with you it feels right." As Elizabeth continued to open up about her fears and hopes, Jason listened carefully. He nodded at the right moments, offered comforting words, and played the role of the perfect companion. But inside he was torn. The more Elizabeth shared, the harder it became for him to see her merely as a means to an end. Jason had planned every detail of this night meticulously: the romantic dinner at Elizabeth's favorite restaurant, the moonlit walk through the park, and now, as they stood on the balcony of her penthouse overlooking the twinkling city lights, he knew it was time. His heart raced as he turned to face Elizabeth, her gentle eyes glowing with affection. Jason took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he was about to do. He reached into his pocket, feeling the small velvet box that held the ring he had carefully chosen. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "these last few months with you have been the happiest of my life." He paused, watching as her eyes widened with realization. Slowly, Jason lowered himself onto one knee, holding the ring box open. The diamonds sparkled in the soft light. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at Jason. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Oh, Jason," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you." Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, a smile spreading across his face as he stood up. Elizabeth threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. He could feel her tears of joy dampening his shoulder. In that moment, Jason felt a surge of triumph. His plan was working perfectly. Soon he would have access to Elizabeth's wealth and all his problems would be solved. He would be able to pay off his debts and provide the best care for his mother. But as he held Elizabeth in his arms, listening to her whispered words of love and gratitude, a small voice in the back of his mind began to speak. It questioned his motives, reminding him of the genuine kindness and love that Elizabeth had shown him. For a brief moment, Jason felt a pang of guilt. The wedding day arrived, bathed in the soft light of autumn. Elizabeth had chosen a small chapel for the ceremony, its stained glass windows casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews. Jason stood at the altar, fiddling with his bow tie, his eyes fixed on the entrance. When Elizabeth appeared, a collective gasp filled the room. She was radiant in a simple ivory dress, her face glowing with happiness. Jason felt his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, he forgot his plan, mesmerized by her beauty and the love shining in her eyes. The ceremony was brief but touching. As they exchanged vows, Jason's voice wavered slightly, torn between his genuine affection for Elizabeth and the guilt gnawing at his conscience. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elizabeth's smile was so radiant it seemed to light up the entire chapel. After the ceremony, the small group of guests gathered for an intimate reception at Elizabeth's favorite restaurant. The room was filled with soft music and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses. Jason found himself surrounded by Elizabeth's wealthy friends, their curious eyes studying him intently. "So, Jason," a silver-haired man named Richard approached him, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Elizabeth tells us you're in finance. Which company did you say you work for again?" Jason felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead. "Oh, actually, I'm between jobs at the moment," he replied smoothly. I'm looking forward to exploring new opportunities now that Elizabeth and I are married. Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Jason could feel the suspicion emanating from him and some of the other guests. He forced a charming smile, determined not to let their doubts shake him. Sensing the tension, Elizabeth quickly came to Jason's side, sliding her arm through his and smiling warmly at him. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said to her friends. "Jason has such a kind heart. He's been telling me all about his ideas for expanding our charity work." Jason nodded enthusiastically, grateful for Elizabeth's intervention. He launched into a discussion about potential new projects, drawing on the research he had done to impress Elizabeth during their courtship. As he spoke, he could see a bit of the suspicion in the guests' eyes start to fade. Throughout the reception, Jason worked hard to charm Elizabeth's friends, deflecting their probing questions with easy laughter and redirecting the conversations to safer topics. He was determined to win them over, knowing their approval could be crucial to his plans. When they arrived at Elizabeth's sprawling mansion, Jason's eyes widened in awe. The marble floors gleamed, and sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elizabeth squeezed his hand, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Welcome home, darling," she said softly. As the days turned into weeks, Jason found himself settling into a life he had only dreamed of. Each morning, he awoke in a luxurious king-sized bed, surrounded by opulence. But it wasn't just the material comforts that began to affect him. Elizabeth's passion for helping others was contagious. She invited Jason to join her at various charity events and volunteer activities. At first, he reluctantly viewed these outings as part of his act, but something unexpected started to happen. One day, in a local community kitchen, Jason watched as Elizabeth served steaming bowls of soup, engaging warmly with everyone who came through the line. Her genuine care for others touched something deep within him. "Here, Jason," Elizabeth said, handing him an apron. "Why don't you help with the bread?" Jason hesitated for a moment before donning the apron. As he handed out slices of warm bread, he made eye contact with those he served. Their grateful smiles and silent thanks stirred emotions he hadn't known he had. One afternoon, Elizabeth took Jason to visit a shelter for abused women and children that she had helped fund. As they toured the facility, Jason witnessed the impact of Elizabeth's generosity firsthand. The safe, comfortable rooms and the relieved faces of the residents left a profound impression on him. "This is incredible," Jason murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Elizabeth smiled at him. "It's wonderful to make a difference, isn't it?" Jason nodded, unable to speak. For the first time, he began to see the true value of wealth beyond personal comfort. Elizabeth's commitment to using her resources to help others was slowly shifting his perspective. As they left the shelter, Jason found himself genuinely curious about Elizabeth's other charitable projects. His interest was no longer just a facade. He listened intently as she described plans for a new educational initiative in underserved neighborhoods. To his own surprise, Jason began offering suggestions and ideas. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled as they discussed ways to make the program even more effective. For a moment, Jason forgot his original plan, absorbed in the excitement of potentially making a real difference in people's lives. As the weeks passed, he found himself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The quiet nights spent with Elizabeth became a cherished part of his days. They sat in the cozy library, surrounded by shelves overflowing with books, sipping tea and engaging in long, meandering conversations. One evening, Elizabeth, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, shared her dream of expanding her charitable work to include a mentoring program for disadvantaged youth. Her passion was palpable, and Jason found himself deeply moved by her vision. "What do you think, Jason?" Elizabeth asked, leaning forward in her armchair, her voice imbued with hope. "Do you believe this could make a difference?" Jason paused, reflecting on her words. To his surprise, he found that he genuinely cared about her ideas. "I think it's brilliant," he replied softly. "You could change so many lives." Elizabeth's face lit up with a radiant smile as she reached out to take his hand. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through Jason, and he felt an unexplainable flutter in his chest. As they continued discussing their hopes and dreams, Jason found himself opening up about his own childhood struggles. He shared stories he had never told anyone before, about how his mother had worked multiple jobs just to put food on the table. Elizabeth listened intently, her eyes filled with compassion. "You've overcome so much," she said gently. "I admire your strength, Jason." Her words struck a deep chord within him, and Jason felt a lump forming in his throat. For a moment, he forgot his plan and saw Elizabeth for who she truly was, a kind and generous woman who truly cared about him. But as the night drew to a close, Jason lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind in turmoil. He couldn't deny the growing affection he felt for Elizabeth, but the weight of his ailing mother and mounting debts pressed heavily on him. "I have no choice," he whispered to himself, trying to steel his resolve. "This is the only way." Even as he reaffirmed his commitment to his plan, Jason couldn't shake the corrosive guilt that had settled in his heart. The path ahead seemed murkier than ever, but he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost to his conscience. Jason took a deep breath, bracing himself for the conversation that awaited him. He found Elizabeth in her office, poring over documents related to her latest charity project. Her face brightened upon seeing him, and Jason felt a pang of guilt. "Elizabeth, darling," he began, his voice soft. "I've been thinking about our finances." Elizabeth set aside her papers, giving Jason her full attention. "Oh, what's on your mind, dear?" Jason sat across from her, his heart racing. "Well, I was thinking it might be simpler if we combined our resources, to streamline things." He watched Elizabeth closely, searching for any sign of suspicion. To his surprise and dismay, she simply smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea, Jason," she said without hesitation. "It would certainly make things easier. We're partners in everything else, so why not this too?" A mix of relief and discomfort washed over Jason as he processed her response. "Are you sure?" Jason asked, almost hoping she might reconsider. Elizabeth reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Of course I'm sure," she said, her eyes filled with unwavering trust. "I trust you completely, Jason. You've brought so much joy into my life." Her words hit Jason like a punch to the stomach. He forced a smile, even as his conscience screamed at him. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll talk to our lawyer and get things started." As he left the office, Jason's mind was in turmoil. He had expected some resistance or questioning, but Elizabeth's total confidence in him made his actions seem even more despicable. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, head in hands. He had achieved what he set out to do, but the victory felt hollow. Elizabeth's unshakable faith in him was both a blessing and a curse. It made his plan easier to execute, but it also amplified the weight of his deceit. The next day, Elizabeth called Jason into her office with an excited smile on her face. "I have a surprise for you, darling," she said, her eyes sparkling. Jason's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what to expect. "What is it, love?" Elizabeth turned her computer screen toward him, revealing an online banking page. "I've set up a joint account for us," she explained, her voice warm with affection. "I want you to have full access to our finances." Jason's eyes widened as he saw the balance displayed on the screen. The amount was staggering, far more than he had ever imagined. A rush of exhilaration coursed through him, mingled with a pang of guilt. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say," he stammered, genuinely taken aback by her trust and generosity. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "You don't need to say anything. We're partners now in every sense of the word." In the days that followed, Jason found himself obsessively checking the account balance on his phone, still in disbelief. The temptation was overwhelming, and soon he began executing his original plan. Carefully, he transferred small sums to a separate account he had created. He was meticulous, ensuring the transfers were irregular and not too frequent. Each time he moved money, his heart raced, torn between exhilaration and shame. As the secret account grew, Jason felt a mix of triumph and discomfort. He was getting what he wanted, but at what cost? Elizabeth's trust in him was absolute, and every loving glance she gave him felt like a silent accusation. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Elizabeth rested her head on Jason's shoulder. "I'm so happy we're doing this together," she murmured contentedly. "Managing our finances, our lives, everything." Jason swallowed hard, his arm around her suddenly feeling heavy with the burden of his deceit. "Me too," he replied softly, his voice barely a whisper. As the days turned into weeks, Jason found himself entangled in a web of his own making. Each morning, he awoke beside Elizabeth, her serene face a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. The weight of his deceit grew heavier with each passing day, while Elizabeth, blissfully unaware of his inner conflict, showered him with more love and affection than ever before. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled hand in hand through their lush garden, Elizabeth turned to him with eyes shining with happiness. "You know, Jason," she said softly, "I never thought I'd find this kind of joy again after losing my husband and my son. But you've brought light back into my life." Jason felt a pang in his chest at her words. He managed to smile, but inside he was unraveling. "I'm glad to make you happy, Elizabeth," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. That evening, while Elizabeth busied herself in the kitchen preparing dinner, Jason retreated to their bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, grappling with his conscience. Guilt gnawed at him, threatening to consume him whole. "What am I doing?" he murmured to himself, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. Yet, as always, thoughts of his sick mother flooded his mind. He imagined her frail figure lying in that cramped apartment, struggling to afford her medications. The image stole his resolve. "I have to do this," he told himself firmly. "For Mom. She needs me." Even as he tried to justify his actions, Jason couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he was losing a part of himself in the process. Elizabeth's kindness and genuine love for him were beginning to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. As he heard Elizabeth's cheerful voice calling him to dinner, Jason took a deep breath, pushed his doubts aside, and forced a smile as he descended the stairs, determined to keep up the charade. He wondered how long he could maintain this double life. As Jason became more involved in Elizabeth's philanthropic work, his internal conflict intensified. He found himself accompanying her to various charity events and volunteering at local shelters. Initially, he saw these activities as mere obligations necessary to uphold his facade. But over time, something unexpected began to change. One crisp autumn morning, Jason was beside Elizabeth at a food bank, distributing hot meals to those in need. He watched as a young mother gratefully accepted a bag of groceries from Elizabeth. The woman's small child clung to her leg, looking up at them with wide, hopeful eyes. "Thank you so much," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "You have no idea what this means to us." Elizabeth smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "We're here to help," she said softly. "You're not alone." As Jason observed this interaction, a lump formed in his throat. For the first time, he truly saw the impact of Elizabeth's generosity. It wasn't just about writing checks or attending fancy galas, it was about making a real difference in people's lives. Later that night, as they drove home, Elizabeth reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes shining with love. "The way you connected with those families today, you have such a big heart." Her words struck Jason like a punch to the gut. A wave of shame washed over him as he thought about the money he was secretly diverting. He looked at Elizabeth's confident face and felt his resolve start to crumble. "I just want to help," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Elizabeth smiled at him, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her husband. "And you are, my love. We're making a difference together." As they continued their drive home in comfortable silence, Jason's mind raced. He thought about the struggling families they had helped, the grateful faces, the lives they were changing. Then he thought about his own mother waiting for him in that small apartment. He had started this deception for her, but now he wasn't sure if he could carry it through. Jason found himself at a crossroads, torn between his original plan and the unexpected path that was unfolding before him. Elizabeth's unwavering love and trust only deepened his internal struggle, making his decision even more difficult. The latest charity event organized by Elizabeth was a heartfelt gathering at a local community center. The room was filled with warmth and hope as people from all walks of life came together to support those in need. Jason stood beside Elizabeth, greeting guests and listening to their stories. As the evening progressed, he was profoundly moved by the tales of hardship and resilience. At one point, a young man barely out of adolescence approached them with tears in his eyes. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you for the scholarship you provided. Changed my life. I'm the first in my family to go to college." Elizabeth beamed warmly, embracing the young man. "You did all the hard work, dear. I'm just glad I could help open the door for you." Jason watched this exchange, feeling a lump form in his throat. He saw the genuine joy in Elizabeth's eyes and the deep gratitude on the young man's face. It was a moment of pure, altruistic kindness that touched him deeply. Throughout the night, more people came forward to share how Elizabeth's generosity had transformed their lives. A single mother spoke of how assistance with childcare allowed her to finish her degree. An elderly couple recounted how Elizabeth's support kept them in their home during tough times. As Jason listened to these stories, he began to see wealth in a new light. It wasn't just about luxury or security, it was a tool that could uplift entire communities and change lives for the better. Jason's internal conflict intensified. The impact of Elizabeth's work revealed a dimension of wealth he had never considered, a dimension that made his deception seem increasingly hollow. He faced the reality that while he had started this charade for a reason, the genuine and transformative power of Elizabeth's charity was challenging his motivations and deepening his remorse. As the event came to a close, Jason felt a profound shift within himself. The weight of his deceit pressed heavily on him, overshadowed by the realization of what true generosity could achieve. The path before him seemed less clear, but the impact of Elizabeth's compassion and the lives she had touched were now a stark contrast to the path he was on. Jason looked at Elizabeth with renewed admiration, realizing the true impact of her kindness and generosity. That night, as they lay in bed, Jason found himself wide awake, his mind racing. Elizabeth slept peacefully beside him, her serene face bathed in the soft moonlight filtering through the curtains. He turned to look at her, feeling a wave of affection that took him by surprise. Jason's heart was torn. On one hand, there was his original plan, the reason he entered this marriage. The thought of his mother still struggling in that cramped apartment weighed heavily on him. But on the other hand, there was Elizabeth, kind, loving, and genuinely good. He thought of all the lives she had touched, all the good she had done, and as he lay there, Jason felt the conflict within him intensify. The line between his initial deceit and his growing feelings for Elizabeth blurred. He wondered if he could truly go through with his plan, knowing now the real value of what Elizabeth had done with her wealth. The following morning, Jason awoke feeling restless, haunted by troubled dreams. His conscience weighed heavily on him as he descended the stairs and found Elizabeth in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I have something to tell you." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been doing some research. I wanted to surprise you." She paused, taking Jason's hand. "I've quietly been helping your mother with her medical bills for the past month." Jason felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. He looked at Elizabeth, speechless. "I know how much you worry about her," Elizabeth continued, misinterpreting his silence as shock. "I thought this might ease your mind a little." Tears welled in Jason's eyes, overwhelmed by Elizabeth's kindness. The gesture made his deceit seem even more cruel. He struggled to find words, his throat tight with emotion. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say," he managed to choke out. She gently squeezed his hand. "You don't need to say anything. Your mother's health is important to me because she is important to you." A wave of guilt washed over Jason. Here was Elizabeth, selflessly helping his mother with no expectation of recognition or reward, while he had been plotting to exploit her generosity. As Elizabeth busied herself with breakfast, Jason sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought. He began questioning everything, his plan, his motives, and above all, his own character. The idea of confessing his original intentions to Elizabeth crossed his mind, but fear gripped his heart. What if he lost everything, not just the financial security he sought, but also the love and trust of this extraordinary woman? As Jason grappled with his inner turmoil, he knew he faced a choice that could redefine his life. He could continue down the path of deceit, further entrenching himself in dishonesty, or he could come clean and confront the consequences, risking everything for the chance to truly earn Elizabeth's trust and rebuild his own sense of integrity. Elizabeth's surprise left Jason speechless. She handed him an envelope, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Open it, dear," she urged gently, her hands trembling slightly. Jason took the envelope and, with a mix of trepidation and anticipation, opened it. Inside was a check for an amount that made his eyes widen in disbelief. He looked up at Elizabeth, his mouth slightly agape. "This is for me?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth nodded, her warm and loving smile unwavering. "Yes, my dear. I want you to use it however you see fit, perhaps to take care of your mother or for any dreams you've been holding on to." Jason stared at the check, his mind racing. It was more money than he had ever had in his hands before, enough to resolve all his problems, cover his mother's medical bills, and start a new life. It was everything he had originally hoped for when he decided to marry Elizabeth. But as he looked at Elizabeth's radiant face, filled with love and trust, Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The weight of his deceit pressed down on him more heavily than ever before. Here was a woman who loved him unconditionally and trusted him completely, offering him a gift that could transform his life. His mind raced with possibilities. He could take the money and disappear, fulfilling his original plan with relative ease. He could ensure his mother's care and start anew elsewhere, and no one would ever need to know the truth. But as he contemplated this option, a deep sense of shame washed over him. How could he betray Elizabeth, who had shown him nothing but kindness and love? How could he turn his back on someone who had given him so much without expecting anything in return? The alternative was equally daunting. He could confess everything to Elizabeth, his initial motives, his deceit, and his gradual change of heart. But what would that mean? Would she ever forgive him? Would she understand that his feelings for her had become genuine, that he had come to love her deeply? Jason grappled with the enormity of his decision, the conflicting emotions swirling within him. He was torn between the security that the money offered and the moral and emotional cost of betraying Elizabeth's trust. As he struggled to reconcile his desires with his conscience, he faced the most challenging choice of his life: to uphold his deceit or to come clean and risk losing everything he had come to value. Jason sat there, the check in his hand, torn between his past and his future, between his fears and his growing conscience. Elizabeth watched him, her eyes filled with love and anticipation, unaware of the turmoil he was experiencing. Jason sat at the computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The check Elizabeth had given him lay beside the mouse, its numbers tempting him. He had already logged into his secret bank account, ready to make the transfer that would secure his future. But something held him back. As Jason stared at the screen, memories flooded his mind. He saw Elizabeth's warm smile when she invited him to lunch, the tenderness in her eyes as she listened to his stories about his mother, and the passion in her voice when she spoke about her charity work. His heart ached as he recalled all the moments they had shared, the quiet nights spent talking about their dreams, the way Elizabeth's face lit up when he proposed, and the trust she showed him every day. Jason's hand trembled as he reached for the mouse, but instead of clicking the transfer button, he found himself closing the browser window. He couldn't do it. He couldn't betray Elizabeth. The weight of his deceit pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He realized that somewhere along the way, his feelings for Elizabeth had become genuine. The plan that once seemed so simple now felt impossible to execute. He abruptly stood up, stepping away from the desk. His mind was made up. He had to tell Elizabeth the truth regardless of the consequences. The thought terrified him, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Jason found Elizabeth in the garden, tending to her roses. The sight of her, so peaceful and unaware, made his heart ache. He approached her slowly, each step feeling like lead. "Elizabeth," he called softly, "I need to talk to you about something important." Elizabeth turned to him, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Jason took a deep breath, bracing himself for what was to come. "I haven't been honest with you," he began, his voice trembling. "There's something I need to confess." His heart pounded in his chest as he sat next to Elizabeth on the garden bench. The fragrance of the roses lingered in the air, starkly contrasting with the weight in his soul. He took another deep breath, his hands shaking as he clasped them together. "I've been hiding something from you," he continued, struggling to steady his voice. "When I first came into your life, I had motives that were less than honorable. I planned to use you to secure my own future." Elizabeth's eyes widened in shock, her expression shifting from warmth to confusion. Jason fought to maintain his composure as he laid bare his deception, knowing that this confession might shatter everything they had built together. Jason's voice was barely a whisper as he began, "Elizabeth, I need to tell you something. It's not easy for me to say this." Elizabeth turned to face him, her brown eyes radiating warmth and concern. "What is it, Jason? You can tell me anything." Jason swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I haven't been honest with you from the beginning. I had a plan, a terrible and selfish plan." He paused, hoping Elizabeth would react, but she remained silent, her gaze steady and patient. Encouraged by her calm demeanor, Jason continued. "When we met at the charity gala, I approached you with the intention of marrying you for your money," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I was desperate. My mother's medical bills were piling up, and I saw you as a way out of my financial troubles." Jason's shoulders slumped as he spoke, the weight of his deceit finally lifting. He couldn't bring himself to look at Elizabeth, fearing the disappointment and anger he was sure would be reflected in her eyes. "I never meant to fall in love with you," he whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. "But I did, and now I can't continue with this charade. I can't hurt you like this. You've shown me nothing but kindness and love, and all I've given you in return are lies." To Jason's astonishment, Elizabeth didn't pull away from him. She didn't raise her voice or demand he leave. Instead, she remained silent, her eyes filled with compassion as she listened to his confession. Encouraged by her serene response, Jason poured out his heart. He detailed his initial plan, how he began siphoning small amounts of money, and how Elizabeth's kindness and generosity had gradually transformed him. He explained the internal conflict he had been wrestling with, torn between his desperate need for financial security and the genuine love he had developed for her. As Jason spoke, Elizabeth's expression remained calm and thoughtful. She didn't interrupt him, allowing him to reveal every facet of his deception and his journey toward redemption. When Jason finally finished his confession, he braced himself for Elizabeth's reaction. To his utter shock, a gentle smile spread across her face. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her touch warm and reassuring. "Oh, Jason," Elizabeth said softly, her voice brimming with understanding. "I've known about your plan from the start." Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. "You knew?" he stammered, unable to process what he was hearing. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes shining with a blend of wisdom and kindness. "Yes, I did. I'm part of a network of philanthropists who do more than just give away money. We often test the integrity of those we choose to help. When I met you at the gala, I saw a young man desperate for help, but with a good heart underneath it all. I decided to take a risk with you, hoping that by showing you kindness and love, you would eventually choose to do the right thing." Jason sat in stunned silence as Elizabeth's words sank in. The realization of her compassion and the depth of her understanding left him overwhelmed. He had feared her reaction, but instead, he found a profound sense of relief and gratitude. Elizabeth's faith in him had never wavered, even when he was at his most deceitful. As they sat together, their hands intertwined, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. Elizabeth's unwavering support and the revelation of her true intentions helped him find the courage to fully embrace the love and honesty he had once thought impossible. The path forward was clear, one of redemption, truth, and a deeper connection than he had ever imagined. Tears welled up in Jason's eyes as the full weight of Elizabeth's words sank in. She had known all along, yet she had chosen to love him, to trust him, and to believe in the goodness within him. "But why?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you take such a risk?" Elizabeth squeezed his hand gently. "Because I saw potential for good in you, Jason. I believed that, given the chance, you would choose love and integrity over greed. And you've proven me right." Jason was overwhelmed by emotion. The realization that Elizabeth had seen the best in him when he couldn't even see it himself was almost too much to bear. He had been given a precious gift, the chance to become a better person, to live up to the faith she had placed in him. Elizabeth's eyes shone with compassion as she looked at Jason, her hand still gently holding his. "Jason, I forgive you," she said softly, her voice full of warmth and understanding. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You forgive me?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Elizabeth nodded, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Yes, I do. I've seen the change in you, Jason. I've watched you grow and open your heart to the joy of helping others. Everyone deserves a second chance, and you've shown you're worthy of one." Tears rolled down Jason's face as the full impact of Elizabeth's words hit him. He had entered her life with selfish intentions, yet she had looked beyond that, believing in his inherent goodness even when he couldn't see it himself. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say," Jason whispered, overwhelmed by her kindness and grace as he gazed into her eyes. Jason felt something shift deeply within his heart. The guilt and shame that had weighed him down began to dissipate, replaced by a feeling he had never experienced before. It was then that he realized with surprising clarity that he had truly fallen in love with Elizabeth. "I love you," he said, startled by his own words but knowing they were true. "I love you, Elizabeth, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I want to be the man you believed I could be." Elizabeth's eyes widened with joy, and she squeezed his hand even tighter. "Oh, Jason," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Jason continued, his words flowing with sincerity. "I want to help others just like you do. I want to use all the skills I have to make a difference in people's lives. Will you teach me? Will you let me be a part of your world of giving and kindness?" Elizabeth nodded, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. "Of course, Jason. Nothing would make me happier than to share this journey with you." Taking a deep breath, Jason looked into Elizabeth's eyes, his heart heavy with determination. "Elizabeth, I need to make things right," he said, his voice firm. "I want to return every cent I've taken from you." Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained silent, allowing Jason to continue. "And I think it's best if you remove my access to your accounts," Jason added, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't deserve that kind of trust just yet." Elizabeth reached out and took Jason's hand in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Jason, I appreciate your honesty and your desire to make amends. If this is what you believe is right, then I will respect your decision." Jason felt a weight lift from his shoulders with Elizabeth's words. He had feared her reaction, but once again, Elizabeth's compassion astonished him. Elizabeth continued, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "I have a proposal for you. Instead of just returning the money, why don't we use it for something meaningful? Something that aligns with the values you've come to embrace." Jason's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth's smile warmed. I've seen how moved you were by our charitable work. Why not use that money to start a new project, one that we can work on together? Jason's heart swelled with emotion. The idea of channeling the money he had once taken out of greed into a noble cause felt like the perfect way to redeem himself. That sounds incredible, he said, his voice filled with emotion. But what kind of project do you have in mind? Elizabeth gently squeezed his hand. Well, that's something we can decide together. What issues have touched your heart most during our work? Jason took a moment to reflect, recalling the faces of those they had helped. Children, he said softly. Those who don't have access to proper education or medical care. I can't stop thinking about how different their lives could be with just a little help. Elizabeth's face lit up. That's perfect, Jason. We could start a foundation focused on providing educational opportunities and medical assistance to underprivileged children. As they began discussing the possibilities, Jason felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He realized that what he had been searching for all along wasn't wealth for its own sake, but the chance to make a real difference in the world. A month passed, filled with hard work and dedication as Elizabeth and Jason poured their hearts into their new foundation. Each day brought them closer together, their bond strengthening through their shared purpose and genuine love for each other. On a crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth and Jason stood hand in hand in a small garden surrounded by a group of people whose lives they had touched. The air was filled with joy and anticipation as they prepared to renew their vows. Jason looked at Elizabeth, his eyes shining with love and gratitude. She wore a simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness. He couldn't believe how far they had come, how much his life had changed because of her unwavering faith in him. As they gazed at each other, Jason took a deep breath. This time there were no hidden agendas, no secrets between them. He spoke from his heart, his voice clear and firm. Elizabeth, when we first met, I was lost. I thought I knew what I wanted, but you've shown me what truly matters in life. Your kindness, your compassion, and your love have changed me in ways I never thought possible. Today I stand before you as a better man, ready to commit my life to you and to the work we do together. I promise to love you, support you, and stand by your side through all of life's challenges. I vow to be honest, faithful, and true now and forever. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with tears, her heart swelling with emotion as Jason's words touched her deeply. As Elizabeth listened to Jason's heartfelt vows, she was deeply moved. When it was her turn, her voice trembled with emotion. Jason, our journey hasn't been easy, but it has been beautiful. You've shown me that second chances can lead to the most wonderful surprises in life. Your growth, dedication, and love have filled my heart with joy. I promise to continue believing in you, supporting your dreams, and loving you unconditionally. Together, we will keep making a difference in this world, one life at a time. As they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, the small gathering erupted in applause. Jason looked around at the children from the smiling faces, the families who had supported them through tough times, and the colleagues who had witnessed their journey. At that moment, Jason felt a profound sense of peace. He knew without a doubt that he had finally done the right thing. The path ahead was clear, filled with purpose and love. Holding Elizabeth's hand, he felt truly fulfilled, ready to face any challenges life might bring, knowing they would tackle them together. In the weeks that followed, Jason found himself increasingly immersed in Elizabeth's philanthropic work. He began accompanying her to various charity events and outreach programs, no longer just observing but actively participating. One sunny afternoon, they visited a local community center providing support for families struggling with medical bills. While Elizabeth spoke with the organizers, Jason noticed a young man sitting alone, looking overwhelmed and defeated. Approaching him, Jason introduced himself. Hi, I'm Jason. Mind if I sit with you for a bit? The young man, named Mike, nodded hesitantly. As they talked, Jason learned that Mike's mother was battling cancer, and the family was drowning in medical debt. Jason's heart ached, recalling his own struggles. Leaning in, he spoke softly but with deep understanding. I know exactly how you feel, Mike. I've been there too. For the next hour, Jason shared his own story, the despair, the fear, and the eventual hope he had found. Mike listened intently, his eyes widening as Jason described the support he had received and how it had transformed his life. You're not alone in this, Jason reassured him, placing a comforting hand on Mike's shoulder. We're here to help. Elizabeth watched from across the room, her heart swelling with pride as she saw Jason connect with Mike. She could see the tension leaving Mike's shoulders, replaced by a glimmer of hope. Later that night, as they drove home, Elizabeth reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. You were incredible today, she said softly. Jason smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. It felt good to help, he admitted. I never thought I'd say this, but giving back is amazing. From that day forward, Jason dedicated himself to philanthropy with renewed energy. He began developing programs specifically designed to support families overwhelmed by medical debt, using his personal experiences to create meaningful solutions. As Jason and Elizabeth worked side by side, their bond deepened with each passing day. They spent countless late nights discussing new initiatives, brainstorming ideas, and sharing their dreams for the future. Jason found himself falling even more in love with Elizabeth, not only for her kindness and generosity but also for the way she inspired him to become a better person each day. One evening, Jason stood outside his mother's modest apartment, his heart racing with a blend of nervousness and anticipation. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. With a gentle knock, he entered the small living room where Linda sat in her favorite armchair, looking much healthier than she had in months, thanks to regular medication. "Mom," Jason said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I have something important to tell you." For the next hour, Jason poured out his heart, recounting everything that had happened since he met Elizabeth. He spoke of his initial deceit, the guilt that had consumed him, and the transformative power of Elizabeth's love and forgiveness. Linda listened intently, her eyes wide with each revelation. When Jason finished, a heavy silence enveloped the room. "Oh, Jason," Linda finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say." Jason lowered his head, bracing himself for her disappointment. But then he felt the warm touch of his mother's hand on his cheek, gently lifting his face to meet her gaze. "I'm so proud of you, my boy," Linda said, tears welling up in her eyes. "You chose the path of integrity and love, even when it was the hardest thing to do." A weight seemed to lift from Jason's shoulders. "You're not disappointed in me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Linda shook her head, a tender smile on her face. "I always knew you were a good person. Life hasn't been easy for us, but you never lost your kindness. Elizabeth has brought out the best in you, helping you become the man I always knew you could be." Tears streamed down Jason's face as he embraced his mother. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "Your faith in me means everything." As they parted, Linda's eyes sparkled with joy. "Now tell me more about this wonderful Elizabeth. I can't wait to meet the woman who has captured my son's heart." Early one morning, Jason and Elizabeth sat side by side at the dining table, surrounded by papers and laptops, deeply engrossed in planning their newest philanthropic venture. "I think we should call it Second Chances," Jason suggested, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It's what you've given me, and what we want to offer to these children." Elizabeth nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. "That's perfect, Jason. And I think your story will be the heart of this program." In the weeks that followed, Jason and Elizabeth worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They reached out to community centers, schools, and youth organizations in underserved neighborhoods. Their goal was simple yet powerful: to inspire young people to believe in themselves and make positive choices, regardless of their circumstances. One chilly autumn morning, Jason stood before a group of teenagers in a community center gym. His palms were sweaty, but his voice was resolute as he began to speak. "I know what it feels like to be trapped," he said, meeting the eyes of the young people before him. "To feel like there's no way out except by taking shortcuts or hurting others. I've been there." As Jason shared his story, the despair, the mistakes, and the redemption, he saw recognition in the eyes of his audience. Some nodded, while others leaned forward in their seats. "But I've learned something important," Jason continued, his voice rich with conviction. "Our choices define us, not our circumstances. And it's never too late to make the right choice." He went on to explain the Chan initiative, detailing the mentorship programs, educational support, and job training opportunities they were offering. As he spoke, hope began to blossom on the faces before him. After the presentation, a young girl approached Jason, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you really think someone like me could get a second chance?" she asked hesitantly. Jason knelt down to her level, his heart brimming with compassion. "Absolutely," he said gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you." As he watched the girl's face light up with a tentative smile, Jason felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He knew this was just the beginning of his journey to make a difference in young lives. The Chan initiative gained momentum, and Jason and Elizabeth found themselves working side by side more than ever. Their shared passion for helping others became the cornerstone of their relationship, strengthening their bond in ways they had never imagined. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning sessions, they sat together on their porch swing watching the sunset. Elizabeth rested her head on Jason's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You know," Jason said softly, "I never thought I could be this happy." Elizabeth looked up at him, her eyes filled with love. "What do you mean?" Jason took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "When I met you, I thought wealth was the answer to everything. I was so focused on taking that I couldn't see what really mattered." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But now, seeing the difference we're making in these children's lives, I've realized that true happiness comes from giving." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "I'm so proud of you, Jason. You've come so far." Jason nodded, his eyes misty. "It's all because of you, Elizabeth. You saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself. You gave me a chance to be better." As they sat there, warming themselves in the glow of the setting sun and each other's company, Jason marveled at how profoundly his life had changed. The despair and guilt that once consumed him had been replaced by a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. He reflected on the young lives they were touching through their initiative, the hope they were instilling in those who felt desperate. This brought him a joy he had never known before. "You know," Jason said, turning to Elizabeth with a smile, "I think we're the lucky ones." Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes shining. "How so?" "These kids," Jason continued, his voice filled with warmth, "they're teaching us just as much as we're teaching them." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "They remind us every day of the power of second chances, don't they?" Jason leaned in and kissed her gently. "They do. And I'm grateful for my second chance every day." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason and Elizabeth sat in comfortable silence, their hearts full of love for each other and for the life they had built together. They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united in their commitment to making a difference in the world. The next day, Jason sat at his desk, sorting through a pile of correspondence that had accumulated over the past week. Most of it was routine mail related to their foundation, but one envelope caught his eye. It was handwritten and addressed simply to Mr. Jason. Curious, he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As he began to read, his heart swelled with emotion. "Dear Mr. Jason, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Tanya, and I was one of the students in your Second Chances program last year. I wanted to write to thank you for everything you have done for me. Before meeting you and Mrs. Elizabeth, I didn't think I had a future. My family was struggling to make ends meet, and college seemed like an impossible dream. But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Thanks to your guidance and the scholarship from your foundation, I am now finishing my first year of nursing school. It hasn't been easy, but whenever I feel like giving up, I remember what you told us. Your past does not define your future. Mr. Jason, you didn't just provide financial support. You gave me hope. You showed me that it's never too late to change your path in life. Your story inspired me to believe in myself and keep moving forward, no matter what obstacles I face. I want you to know that your kindness has changed my life forever. One day, I hope to give back and help others the way you helped me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sincerely, Tanya." As Jason finished reading, he realized his cheeks were wet with tears. He read the letter again, his hands trembling slightly. Every word resonated deeply within him, reminding him of his own journey and the incredible transformation he had undergone. "Elizabeth," he called, his voice choked with emotion. "Elizabeth, you need to see this." Elizabeth rushed into the room, concern etched on her face. "What is it, Jason? Is everything okay?" Jason nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the letter, watching as her expression softened while she read it. When she finished, Elizabeth looked at Jason with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Jason," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. Jason stood and embraced his wife, the letter still clutched in his hand. "This is why we do what we do," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the real reward." As the sun rose on their first wedding anniversary, Elizabeth and Jason set out on a journey that held deep significance for both of them. They were returning to the impoverished community that had played such a crucial role in Jason's transformation. The trip was serene, filled with anticipation and reflection. Jason's hand rested on Elizabeth's, a gesture of love and gratitude. As they approached the neighborhood, Jason was flooded with memories of his first visit here, driven by selfish motives. Now his heart swelled with a different emotion, hope. They stopped at the community center, a modest building bustling with activity. As soon as they got out of the car, they were greeted by a chorus of applause and warm smiles. Familiar faces rushed to meet them, enveloping the couple in hugs and handshakes. "Mr. Jason." "Mrs. Elizabeth," a boy shouted, making his way through the crowd. It was Timmy, a child they had helped secure a life-saving operation for just a few months earlier. He threw his arms around Jason's waist, beaming up at him. "Look, I can run now." Jason knelt down, his eyes meeting Timmy's. "That's amazing, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." As they navigated through the crowd, Jason was struck by the genuine affection in the eyes of the people. They weren't just recipients of charity, they were friends, partners in a shared vision of a better future. Inside the community center, they were surprised to find a small celebration had been arranged in their honor. Homemade decorations adorned the walls, and a simple cake was placed on a table surrounded by smiling faces. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly coordinator of the center, approached them with tears in her eyes. "We couldn't let your anniversary pass without showing our gratitude," she said, clasping their hands. "You two have brought so much hope to our community." As Jason looked around the room at the faces of those whose lives he and Elizabeth had touched, he felt a profound sense of belonging. This was where he was meant to be, this was his purpose. As the day's celebrations came to a close, Jason and Elizabeth found themselves hand in hand on a small hill overlooking the community. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood they had come to love. Jason squeezed Elizabeth's hand gently, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He turned to look at her, marveling at how her eyes sparkled in the fading light. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I never imagined my life could be like this." She smiled at him, her face radiating love and understanding. "Life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it?" Jason nodded, his eyes misty as he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. "I came into your life with such selfish intentions," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Elizabeth rested her head on his shoulder. "I saw a good man who had lost his way, and I knew that with love and trust, you would find your true path." As they watched the sun sink below the horizon, Jason felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He thought about the lessons he had learned about honesty, integrity, and the true meaning of wealth. He realized that the richest moments of his life were not tied to money but to the love he shared with Elizabeth and the difference they made together. "You gave me a second chance," Jason said, turning to face Elizabeth fully. "And I promise you, I will make the most of every single day." Elizabeth cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We'll make the most of it together, my love." As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jason and Elizabeth stood in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, their shared love and purpose would guide them through. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.